Heading into week 4 of the fantasy football season, here's a few kickers I looked at on waivers this week. The first guy is Chase McLaughlin of the Cleveland Browns. So McLaughlin, he had a huge ball game in week 3 versus the Chicago Bears with 18 fantasy points, a 23-yarder, 46-yarder, a 53 and a 54-yarder, and 2 extra points in that ball game. So right now he's available in 93% of fantasy leagues, and he has a good matchup next week indoors at the Minnesota Vikings, where both these teams, in my opinion, will go up and down the field in this game. And McLaughlin, he's been steady so far this season in the few chances he's had kicking the field goals. And right now, with a good matchup next week and a big game he had here in week 3, he's definitely worth a pickup. The next kicker is Rodrigo Blankenship of the Indianapolis Colts. So some people went out there and dropped him in a lot of fantasy leagues over the last few weeks here. And right now, Rodrigo Blankenship, one of the better kickers last season in fantasy football. He's available in 53% of fantasy leagues. So in week 3 at Tennessee, a 26 and a 28-yarder and a 44-yarder and an extra point in that ball game for Blankenship. So Blankenship, he's been pretty consistent the first 2 out of 3 weeks. Week 1 versus Seattle, 4 points. Week 2 versus the Rams, 12. And week 3 at Tennessee, 11. So next week in Miami, it's a pretty decent matchup for Blankenship. And if you need kicking help, I think he's a decent ad this week. The next kicker I would look to add on waivers this week's Greg Joseph for the Minnesota Vikings. So far, Joseph, he's been pretty impressive, in my opinion. In the early going of the season here, is the rookie kicker for Minnesota. Week 1 at Cincinnati, a 53-yarder and 3 extra points. Week 2 at Arizona, 54 and a 53-yarder. And he did miss a chip shot at 37 yards to win the game, 3 PATs and a missed extra point. And then week 3 versus Seattle, 13 fantasy points, 3 extra points, a 42-yarder, 37-yarder, and a 26-yarder for Joseph. So next week versus Cleveland, I think he'll get pretty decent amount of opportunities to kick a few field goals. And like I mentioned, he's almost just reached double-digit fantasy points each and every week, with 8 points being the least for him. So right here, Joseph, he's available in 96% of fantasy leagues. He's with a team with a high-powered offense, and he's going to get many opportunities, in my opinion, to have good days as the season goes on. The next kicker is Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals. So the young rookie kicker, another impressive kicker so far this season for the Bengals. Week 1 versus Minnesota, 11 fantasy points, 34-yarder, 53-yarder, and 3 extra points, including a walk-off game-winning field goal. Week 2 at Chicago, 52-yarder and 2 extra points. And week 3 in a shocking victory at the Pittsburgh Steelers for McPherson, 47-yarder and 3 extra points. So week 4 versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, this Cincinnati Bengal team should have many opportunities to be in the red zone. McPherson, it wouldn't surprise me to see him hit 2 or 3 field goals and a few extra points. And he's got one of the better legs in the league, in my opinion. And he's only a rookie, like I mentioned, and he's also available in 96% of fantasy leagues. And the 5th and final kicker I will look to add on waivers this week's Brandon McManus of the Denver Broncos. So McManus, he got added a lot last week, going up 14%, but he's still available in a whopping 66% of fantasy leagues. And so far, he's been one of the best kickers in fantasy football. Week 1 at the Giants, 9 fantasy points. Week 2 at Jacksonville, 13. And week 3 versus the New York Jets, a 27-yarder, 33-yarder, a 44, a 46-yarder, and 2 extra points made. So week 4, a little bit of a tougher test here for McManus and the Broncos versus the Baltimore defense. But right here, the Baltimore defense, we saw him have some trouble versus Detroit, almost blowing that game in the league until Justin Tucker hit a walk-off 66-yarder. So in this ball game, I think McManus again could easily reach double digits, because the Broncos, they're a team that gets to the red zone a lot, but they don't finish off a lot of drives in the end zone. So right here, McManus is definitely worth an add, and that's a few kickers I looked at on the waiver wire here for week 4 of the fantasy football season.